thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. Stephan Turban and I will be speaking about understanding university-level research, explaining how both of us have conducted our research projects at university, what Stephan is doing right now, and also explain how this can impact undergrad and postgrad admissions globally. So let me take this opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Namita Mehta, and I'm the president of the Red Pen, which is an independent education consulting company. We've been around for over 9 years, and what we do is help students and families find their best fit educational fits. We do this at all levels of education. We work with students at the school level, boarding school level, and we also advise on undergrad, postgrad, and MBA admissions, and PhD admissions. But today I'm going to focus more on, the impact that research has on your applications and speak a little bit about my personal experience doing research. Stephan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hey, I'm Stephan Turban. I am the founder of Lumiere Education. I'm also a PhD student at Harvard Business School and at Harvard University. And Lumiere Education, one of the things that we'll talk a little bit about today is the creator of a program called the Lumiere Research Scholar Program, which allows for talented high school, college, and postgraduate students to do research one-on-one in small groups with top researchers around the world. I'll just say, I think it's important to kind of say why I care about research, because I think that really informs my work with Lumiere. Like, why am I doing this in the middle of a PhD? It's really connected to my family's history, which has been deeply affected by the opportunities to do research, or the lack of opportunities. My great-grandfather, who I put a picture here, his name was Fritz Kahn. He was a famous science writer in Germany during the Weimar Republic, which is in like the 20s and 30s, but he was Jewish. And so as the 30s went on, the Holocaust began, he fled and tried to flee from Germany. He actually got out because of a letter from his friend Albert Einstein. But right when he left, his son, my grandfather, was about to enter college, and so never got the opportunity to study college. So he eventually, my grandfather, Raphael, moved to the United States, bounced between working class jobs. My dad grew up really poor, grew up in Hawaii, picked pineapples throughout high school. And then when my dad was about to enter college, his dad passed away. And so my dad, this young kid, barely 20, started thinking about how he could live through his dad's memory. And one of the answers for him was to do something that his father never got the opportunity to do. And that was to do research, to dive into higher education. He like the opportunities I think the Red Pen provides, he never got those opportunities. And so my dad started doing research at Psych Lab, absolutely fell in love with it, eventually got a PhD. He's been a professor for the past 30 years. And for me, I was an undergrad at Harvard, and this guy in the bottom right corner, this guy, David Garvin, was an immensely close mentor of mine, like a father at HBS. And he changed my direction entirely from to thinking about research as a lifetime pursuit. And so Lumiere, our goal is to in many ways, in my mind, just to provide the opportunity that my grandfather did not have for talented students around the world. I'm excited to talk about what research is and what it isn't today, but I think it's just important to understand how much research can change someone's life. And I'm really excited to hope people listening have engaged or will engage with research, because it's a remarkable opportunity to dive into something new.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Stephan. I think, you have a fantastic story, and it just kind of shows your passion for research and, why you're doing what you're doing. Before you continue, I just want to let the attendees know that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We have about a 20-minute presentation, after which we will dive into the questions. I mean, of course, that's the most important part of this morning. We want to be able to answer all your questions, help you understand what research is and whether it is for you or not. So please do put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will definitely get to it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, so, I think the first thing to talk about is, what is research? And it's this really tricky question. Let me say that there's really two axes by which people define research. And most people think about only one of the axes. So one axis that everyone talks about is, what is the subject that you're studying? I mean, that's pretty easy, right? So I'm researching economics, I'm researching in biology, I'm researching in computer science. So that's important, because it allows you to understand what are the topical areas and types of knowledge that you're interested in. But one of the areas that we find at Lumiere, and that I found as well as my PhD and working with other researchers, is that people often don't think about the way research is conducted, whereas that actually is in many ways the more important facet of what research is, because it defines really how you live your life. Namita and I were talking beforehand about how she used to do lab-based research, and what was it you said you would go at night to
you have to collect your viral load data points whenever your timings are. So it was every 3 hours for me. So I'd wake up in the middle of the night and go take my readings. I mean, that's how lab-based research is conducted. I'll speak more about my research project later, but yeah, I mean, you can't just ignore your your growing cells in the lab if that's something that you're working on.
Right, exactly. And I'll before diving into these different types of research, let me just say one thing, which I think is a really important misconception to address directly, and that is that scientific research does not just mean lab-based STEM research. There's research that's happening in any variety of fields, anything from, of course, our lab-based research STEM areas, but to business research, that's my area of expertise, economics, to literature, to dance. There's research actually to international relations, touches a really broad number of subjects. And so when we think about research, if your passion goes in an area that's not necessarily STEM, you absolutely can do research. And in fact, that is, we'll talk a little bit about how research can help you stand out in missions, but research that is unique and distinctive can even help you stand out even more. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on, but I just want to quickly go over what are the 4 main types of research in terms of the methods that you would use. So the first, which Namita is going to talk about and has deep expertise in, is lab-based research. So this is research where you're in a lab, you're really focused on trying to find causality. And the way that you find causality is by creating an experimental setting in which you're changing only one variable or at most 2 or 3 variables in order to understand what is happening when I change something. So you're trying to get a causal effect. These lab-based research can be quite intensive. They generally, because of their structure, they don't necessarily require as advanced, say, quantitative methods, so they can. This is increasingly happening in different biotech spaces, because the experimental structure itself already proves out causality. It proves out why is something happening in the world. So that's kind of lab-based research. Quantitative research, so that's like, I think, how often people think about it. Pipettes, lab-based research. Quantitative research is a large field. It's actually my area. I studied statistics in undergrad, and now I apply data science framework to understanding how businesses work. But essentially what you're trying to do quantitative research is that you are using existing or creating new data sets to try to understand something that's happening in the world. And one way that you do that, and economists are very good at this, is by finding shocks in the world. So an example of this might be the coronavirus. So the coronavirus has changed how we all work, how we all function. It's shut down economies. Some economies have not shut down. Those types of external shocks allow us to get at the data and allow us to get at what is happening in the world. And many researchers, economists included, business researchers, are having a kind of a field day right now with coronavirus as an external shock, what we call an exogenous shock, that allows them to understand more deeply what is happening in the world and how do humans, individuals, and systems work. That's around quantitative research. Theoretical research is about thinking deeply and critically, and generally with a very strong form of logic to address a question. This could be, for example, the classic of classic research of a mathematician, someone who is trying to solve a problem, but has to just think about it. And an example of this is the field medalist Ngo Bao Cho, who's this mathematician at University of Chicago, heralded as one of the greatest mathematicians of our time. And he talks about how he spent 7 years just thinking about how to set up a question in order to answer it. 7 years spending how to set up a question. Now, that doesn't mean that, as you do research, it's you're in high school, college, grad school, that you're expected to spend 7 years on it. But you can think about the rigor gone into it. He did not use any data to answer the question. He's using fundamentally logic, in this case, mathematical logic, to address a question. Political science, you can see this philosophy is actually very common to see this type of theoretical research. And then finally, qualitative research. And qualitative research is so much fun. This is about going out in the world and speaking with people to get at a question that you have. So this might include, for example, if you're interested in gender disparities in a certain field. For example, we want to look at gender disparities in finance for the Lumiere Research Scholar Program. She is going to go out and talk to different women and men in finance to understand their experience. And this is very much around the skill sets needed here is much more abstract thinking, ability to categorize information broadly and put it together into a synthesized form. So we'll move on from here, but as you think about research, I think the main points are twofold. So one is that research extends far beyond just these STEM fields. In fact, it goes to many different areas. And two is, as you think about research, think critically about what type of research and what method of research excites you. Because you can have a field, but even within one field, I give the example of economics here or political science, there can be multiple types of research. And so those are really the two questions you need to answer when you're thinking, oh, what should I do when I think about research, and what exactly is research? Now, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you've covered the basis here on different kinds of research, and I mean I just want to reiterate the point that when you're a high school student, you automatically think that research involves you perhaps going out in the field or sitting with a lab professor and doing something in a lab. But there's so much more to research than just simply working in a lab or going out in the field and gathering data. You can do research from home. You can do research in a very logical manner, like how Stephan explained. And that's the beauty about it, really. I mean, you can really do research in all aspects and all subjects as well. I mean, you can see that Stephan said mentioned a few subjects under the qualitative research. You can do anthropology, sociology, but even the softer subjects like dance and music, a lot of research is being done in these fields as well. And it's very, very interesting. So we're going to speak a little bit more about our personal research experiences that'll explain, how you can even do research sitting at home on your laptop. Besides just going out in the field. And I think that's really important given the current situation when we can't actually physically be out there doing research in a lab or doing research in a field. So yeah,
absolutely. And I'll just dive into the process of research, which is in many ways the scientific method. And I'll use an example paper that I wrote when I was an undergrad. I wrote with now a colleague of mine, but at the time my thesis advisor at HBS, this amazing professor, Ethan Bernstein. So this is an example of empirical or quantitative research. So I was interested in the effects of a change to office structure, kind of make it to our point we were talking about earlier, on how people communicated. So the first step was data analysis. So I had an existing data set that was looking at people communicating. We used essentially sensors to track who spoke with who in an office, and we also had email data. So I used a different type of statistical software, which is R, to analyze the data itself. From there, I then created a write-up. In this case, for me, it was my senior thesis, and that was a pretty significant piece of work. But when you think about the scientific process, by the way, so most students will kind of end at this stage, and this is for admissions and for showing your intellectual rigor. This is about where you need to get to if you want to talk around research. But if you don't want to go further, then you apply to different journals. And so in this case, we applied to a journal. This old journal that has existed for a few hundred years called Philosophical Transactions. We go back and forth. So the way this journal process works is that they say, okay, great, we got this. But then you have these anonymous reviewers who say, but think about these certain things, and then submit it back to us. So there's this process of revision and submission. And then for us, and this is, I think, what really excites me about research is the opportunity to have impact. And in our case, we were talking about the open office, and a lot of the work, it went beyond just us writing this research, but also talking with different media outlets, writing different pieces. My co-author wrote a piece for HBR, which is Harvard Business Review, on our research, and there's a real value there. So this is kind of the process, and this can take time. The Research Scholar Program, which we'll talk about, is about 10 weeks and really helps you dive into it. And without structure, it can be a pretty confusing process. And but we want to give you a little bit of an idea of this example research project that I did when I was a student, which I think made it much easier for me to then apply to, in this case, graduate school programs. I'll pass to you.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience doing research. I actually completed my integrated master's program at the University of Oxford, where I studied molecular and cellular biochemistry. It was a 4-year program and you didn't get a bachelor's degree, you just got a master's straight away. And a part of our degree, so in the last year, for the first 3 months, which is the summer term, every single student that was doing my degree, studying biochemistry, had to do some kind of lab research. You were either, you could choose from any of the labs in Oxford, or you could apply to labs across Europe or even at Princeton University. So because of my background, I actually applied to the Max Planck Institute near Frankfurt, to this university called Marburg, University of Marburg, where I worked in the lab for 3 weeks. And essentially, what I did there was, with a research advisor, we identified a question that I was going to answer. And because it was just a 3 to 4 month project, it had to be quite tight. We had to kind of come up with a question that I could, do enough lab work in and have enough experimentation and data to write up. I think the point that I want to make here is that I will speak about the process in a minute, but the point that I want to make here is that, this was a compulsory component of my degree. So research is really, really highly looked upon. It is very, very important. And, about 20% of my cohort then went on to apply to PhD programs. And if you have a research project that you've done, if you have something to show for yourself to see that you've actually been in, worked with scientists for a long period of time, and then explain what you've done, explain what you've been able to do, that really sets you up to apply for strong PhD programs or, further science degrees if you're interested. And also for employers, we'll talk about that in a minute. But essentially, that's what I did. I did like a 4-month research project in a lab in Germany. It was a bit of a challenge for me because it was a German-speaking lab, but I did learn German for about 12 years, so it was great. But so I was able to kind of do it, really practice my German simultaneously and do the research. And yeah, we identified a question. I still remember my mentor's name was Dr. Penelope Higgs, and we were working on a particular protein called ATP and whether it was going to be used by a protein or not. Now, the interesting thing was that the project that I worked on required me to actually use radioactive material. And, I had to kind of wear a PPE suit, and I was shown how to, really, get into a lab where there were the radioactive material, what are the safety precautions, how do you do it? I did need to be supervised because I was still a master's student, but, it was fantastic. The whole process, the lab experimentation part, after the first couple of times, I was trusted to use the machinery in the lab on my own, and then I did the data analysis. And we had meetings every Monday where the whole lab would kind of get together, and we all had to present our results, talk about what we had done during the week. And that was great because I was really able to develop my presentation skills. With a group of scientists, they questioned you, right? It wasn't just like everyone presenting. They asked you, so why did you do this, and what do you think this result means, and how many times are you going to repeat this experiment? And it was great because everybody contributed to my research as well, gave me ideas on how to tweak different parts of the experiment so that I could then do it better, do it again. And eventually I had to kind of present a write-up to the University of Oxford, which is again part of my degree. And in addition to that, we had to do a viva, which meant that after you presented your write-up, we had a panel of 3 or 4 different professors that would invite you to come in, and they would ask you questions about your research project, just to make sure that you actually did it and you wrote it and you're able to discuss science as well. So that's a point that I want to make, that research is it helps you in so many different ways. In my subject, it's kind of the basis. If you want to go into research at university or beyond, for science especially, this is kind of it. You got to be able to publish your papers. You got to be able to talk about where your research is going and who's reading it. But it also helps you develop so many fantastic skills. Being able to sit together with scientists, at at the master's level and discuss with them what research you've done, take critical feedback is fantastic. And then of course, when you have a viva where you have, professors who are essentially specialists in their field, they know more about their particular subject than anyone in the world, right? They're going to ask you questions about what you've done, why you chose this experimental method, why you didn't do this, or, why didn't you include this in your write-up? You have to be able to defend what you've done. You have to be able to speak about it with passion, with conviction. And those are excellent skills for even future employees. Now, the external press part, yes, if you're lucky and you end up staying in touch with your mentor, sometimes your work can get published. But I must say that a 3 or 4 month tenure, doing research is not typically enough to get yourself published. You might get your name in a byline because your results might be used in a paper that is later published, or you might decide that you want to kind of continue working in that space if you apply for a PhD. But the idea is that, my degree had an integrated research program embedded in it. I mean, you couldn't get your degree if you didn't do this. So again, it's really, really, goes to say that, research is so important. And if you can get a head start and, be able to show that you've done some of this in high school or even as an undergraduate student when you're applying for a master's program, it's really going to be valued in the academic space and beyond. So again, just to kind of reiterate a little bit about lab-based research. Again, when I entered the lab in Marburg, there were so many things that I didn't know. Obviously, I'd never really been in a lab and thrown a research question. And these are the things that kind of made me learn about what lab-based research is all about. First of all, you need to be very compliant with the lab. There are so many safety precautions, like I mentioned. I was able to kind of deal with some of the radioactive substances because that was part of my research project. But there's a whole process toward that. They wouldn't just allow you to enter a lab. I had to actually wear a PPE coat, sign in, sign out. Doors had to be locked. The fumigation, the fume cupboard had to be on. So that was something that really kind of taught you about really like being in a lab and what it entails. And this is not just for me. This is for every scientist that was part of that lab, right? So it just kind of shows you what lab research really does entail. Of course, it enhances your theoretical knowledge. I mean, after being at Oxford for 3 years and learning so much theory, you're actually putting this to use, right? Okay, like I'm what's happening to that ATP, to that last phosphate in this particular case? What bond is it breaking? And you're really able to see that through your data, and that's really exciting. And I mentioned this, there's so much discussion that's happening. It's not like, one thing about, lab research is, yes, you might be on your own, doing your own experiments, but a lot of it is you have to be able to explain what you've done and talk about the data that you've got. And that happened through the morning meetings that I explained. So again, that's really developing your analytical skills, your critical thinking skills. The other thing about science is that it's very, very niche, okay? You're typically working with one particular protein or one particular, molecule, even sometimes if it's very molecular, and it's very detailed. So it's not like a large research question that you might have if, you were looking at a data project, or if you were working with, an arts field. My research was very much about this one particular protein and whether it was taking a phosphate group of ATP or not. I mean, literally very niche. And it requires a lot of practice and multiple trials. It's tedious. Like Stephan said, there was a mathematician who took 7 years just to come up with a question. I think the group that I worked with was really trying to see whether one of the proteins that they had managed to that I was working on could be a potential inhibitor for cancer. And that was kind of the whole, like the larger part of the research that was happening in the institute that I worked at. But I was only working on one particular protein in one particular part, because if that showed results, then you could move on to the other parts as well. So that's kind of how research is done. You don't typically take one large protein and then throw different experimentation at it. It's done in a very, very niche way. And of course, there's multiple trials. I mean, sometimes you'd get results that made sense, sometimes you didn't, and then you'd have to go back and think about it. Like, did these results, did this happen because I messed up? Like, did I not turn the photons on, or what was my material contaminated? You have to think about all of that, right? Because if you've had like 5 sets of data that are showing one kind of hypothesis, and then the 6th set shows something different, you have to continue to think about what could have gone wrong, what couldn't have gone wrong, and that's kind of where all the discussion comes into play. So yeah, lab-based research is highly rewarding when it works, and it's fantastic. It's great because you do see a lot of your theory in practice, but it can also be very time-consuming and take a lot of energy and a lot of grit.
Yeah. Excellent. So I'll just talk a little bit around, and this is the title of our webinar, so I think it's important to spend a little time on this. So what role research can play in admissions, and I'll just start with the story that I had when I was applying to grad school. Though I think something similar happened to me as well when I was applying to my undergrad program, and my research playing a role. And so when I was applying to grad school, I ended up back at Harvard, but I was also applying to other schools. One of the schools I was applying to was Yale, which is an excellent program in my area. And so I had this meeting with this faculty member I was really excited about. She was doing the exact type of research I wanted to do, very successful, got tenure at a very young age. And so we had this video interview, and she turned on the video, and I was nervous, kind of sweating, and I was like, what's going to happen? And then she had this big smile on her face, and she was like, "Oh my God, Stephen, I'm so excited to talk with you. I've never said this to a student before, but I actually use your research, the research I talked about earlier, in my class." And so immediately for me, I was like, what was a moment of intense nerves where I felt like I was going to get grilled. Immediately I was like, oh, this is going to be a much more relaxed conversation. And so in that moment, the research that I did, spoke for me in advance. And in fact, I think I could have pretty much said anything, and that interview would have gone well, because she had spent more time on my research than we ever would have spent in that conversation, which was a short conversation. It went well, but the research kind of spoke for me in advance. And so that story, now that is not exactly what will happen for people who are applying to undergraduate programs or master's programs, but it is reflective of the opportunity that research can do to speak for you before you even have an interview whatsoever. And so, and when I think about research, I think there's three broad areas that research can help you in your admissions. So the first is differentiation, and we've talked a bit about that, but to put a fine note on this, when you think about what a university is looking at, they're looking for essentially someone who's going to thrive in their school. For universities, the highest level of academic achievement is not receiving a perfect test score. No one is a tenured professor because they got a 36 on their ACT. It's that they can do independent, thoughtful research on important questions for the world. So when you show that you've done research, that shows a level of rigor that goes beyond your high school program, your college program, even your postgrad program itself. So it's a real differentiator that's quite valuable. Second is that it's useful for your CV, of course. This, again, can show you that, hey, I've done something, I've created something in particular that's quite useful, that's independent results. You can highlight who you've worked with in that process. And then finally, and this one I think is really important to highlight, is that when you work on research, you are developing advocates who are then going to work for you. So for example, when I applied to PhD programs, and the exact same thing happened when I applied to undergrad, the people who wrote on my behalf were all my faculty members who I did research with. There were three different professors, three different research projects at Harvard. And for our program, for example, it's all about this one-on-one or small group relationship between an individual mentor and a researcher. And it's very common and very normal to ask for your research mentor to write you a letter of recommendation, because thinking from their perspective, the only way they got to where they are today is because of this line of people who did the exact same thing for them. And so as an academic, it is one of your core responsibilities to support people in their journey. So they're very excited about that. So you connect with future advocates. Namita, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that, if you have done research at a young age, whether it's whether at the high school level, it also shows that you understand the value of it, right? So a group of students that are typically applying to, say, medical programs in the UK, where you can, go straight to right after you finish your grade 12. Yes, of course, you need to show that you have, had work experience. You understand the qualities that a doctor needs to kind of be able to conduct patient care. You need to show that you're compassionate. All of that is very important, of course. But another aspect that really helps is if you've actually been able to have access to some kind of research, because that connects the dots really well. And professors like to see that. Universities like to see that you understand that, yes, being a doctor is important, and that, yes, you have to know anatomy, you have to be caring and have all those skills, but you also understand that there's a group of people who are doing a lot of research that kind of then that impacts the future of medicine, and how do you kind of take that research and then bring it into the pharmaceutical industry, or bring it into like drug development. And that's a very important part that I feel students tend to miss on if you want to be a competitive medical applicant for UK universities. In the US, medicine is a postgraduate program, but at the undergrad level, this is really, really valued, that if you have had time to kind of work with the professor or understand the process of how research is done, for drug development, or for understanding the structure of certain compounds, it's really, really looked upon very highly if you're applying to any kind of biological programs or even medicine in the UK. I just wanted to kind of mention that, Stephan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just one thing to note is that every single tenure professor at a university in the UK or in the United States has gotten there because they've done research. So yes, a little bit of people love the thing that they do. Universities are built on two principles: research, the modern university, research and teaching, right? And so research in many ways, research is valued for many of these institutions at equal or higher level. And so if you can show that, I think it's a valuable for if you're applying to medical school, or if you're applying in, say, the humanities or in social sciences, where again, your professors have done research, and that's the reason that they are where they are today.
Yes.
So I'll just say briefly. So, of course, I'm working with Lumiere, and we're a real social enterprise. Our goal is to make these opportunities available for students around the world. And I've been really impressed with the Red Pen. Red Pen's a close partner of ours, and just a remarkable institution. It's funny. I was like, so what does the Red Pen do? And then I realized actually they do pretty much everything. And so really, from early advising all the way to postgraduate, MBA, even PhD, it is the Red Pen has provided services for people, help people along in that process. And I'll just say my own personal experience, because I obviously don't work in the Red Pen, but I do work with many of the counselors, and they're one of the most professional group I've worked with, and it's really a pleasure. So Namita, of course, is hosting this, and have to give a shout out to this remarkable organization. Even some of my best friends from Harvard actually went through the Red Pen, so it's funny to see this come full circle. But really, am impressed with the Red Pen, and I think Namita, you guys are doing great stuff. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, thank you so much, Stephan. I just wanted to say that, we do help students, really identify the educational journey and help them in the application processes to undergrad, postgrad, MBA, and even boarding school programs. Where, today we're talking about research, but there's so many other components in the application process, and, we guide you there to ensure that you're admitted to a university of your best fit.
Perfect. Well,
let me take this opportunity to explain a little bit more about what Lumiere Research Scholar does. Again, another fantastic program, really, really needed. I mean, I can already see some questions popping up in the Q&A box about how do I get my research published, and how do I find a mentor, and things like that. And I think, Stephan's company, Lumiere Research, provides a platform for you to really dig in to a research project, and gives you access to researchers to help you along the way. As a high school student, you're not expected to kind of just, find a random question on your own and then just write up something. I mean, it's very challenging as it is for a master's student or a PhD student. So if you're a high school student, you're not expected to do that. And oftentimes, like, Stephan mentioned, it's a mentor. It's somebody who can support you through this process, somebody who can really kind of help you and guide you, put you in the right direction, make sure that you're asking the right questions, doing the right research, that that makes the paper a lot more valuable. And Lumiere Research Scholar offers this 10-week research program that I think is very valuable. One thing I do want to say is that, again, it's a competitive program. It's not just like you apply and you're admitted. You really have to fill out an application form. You really have to explain why you want to do this research. share some of the ideas that you have. So again, this is not for everyone, but if you're interested in doing research, you have to have thought about it in advance. And Stephan is quite strict. I mean, he doesn't pick everyone. So yeah, you really have to think about it, but it's a great platform. I mean, he has been able to connect, students to researchers at Oxford, at Stanford, and at Harvard, and having mentors like that, work with you on a research project is only going to help you stand out in your undergraduate application process, or if you're an undergrad student in your postgrad application process, and also give you help you develop those skills that kind of go hand in hand with research. So, Stephan, I'm going to hand it back to you to talk a little bit more about the areas that Lumiere offers. In terms of where they can what topics they can apply to for the research.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are committed to two things. One is that we want to reflect what the academy reflects, and that is a broad diversity of areas to do research. So we talk about the STEM field, lab fields. We have amazing mentors in those areas. One of our mentors I was just talking with the other day, this man Santiago, he's actually an assistant professor at the Mayo Clinic, which is one of the top medical institutions in the United States. He's also a data scientist. So, for example, his work is around data science and health. But our mentors really span the gambit from physics to international relations, to business and entrepreneurship, to engineering, to literature, to philosophy. So this is really just a sampling of some of those research topics. And we only recruit the very best research mentors. So these people have PhDs from Ivy Plus institutions, places like Stanford, Harvard, Brown, Oxford, etc. And as a result, we do have very high standards for our students. And so that's a little bit why, why do we have an application process? I obviously have a very deep social mission, really connected to my grandfather and my family, to make research topics and research opportunities available for students. And we have a high bar for our students, because our research mentors are remarkable, and we want to help them work with some of the best students around the world. And so we cover the gambit, and really open to any questions as well around specific topics. And then I'll just say something briefly about what makes a strong candidate, because anyone here is a friend of the Red Pen, and I want to give them as much preparation as they can get in order to go through our application process. So the first, of course, academic excellence. That is similar to what a university might look like for high school or for graduate students. But the thing that's really going to help you stand out beyond just, hey, getting good grades, getting a good score on a standardized test, is a curiosity and desire to answer questions that matter for the world. And a way to do that, we of course have this application process, is to talk about specific questions that you find interesting. So I'll give an example. One candidate who was amazing recently, she was interested in economics. A lot of students are interested in economics, but she was interested in the economics of roti. Like roti, I'm obviously mispronouncing it, but in of roti, of how the price of roti has changed over the course of the past 5 to 10 years, right? Very specific, kind of weird. I'm not even sure if that could be considered a specific research topic. She'll be working with a research mentor to guide that process, but she showed a level of curiosity about something that I had never thought about, but clearly showed that she is thinking critically about how economics can intersect with her own life. Now, that is not going to work for you if you're applying in chemistry, if you're applying in philosophy or literature, but being specific about your interest will help you get a leg up in this process. And then finally, we're looking for individuals who can work independently and diligently, just as the research process is. You're guided once, over this 10-week program, you're meeting once a week with your mentor who's guiding you in this process. And just like as a researcher, you're expected to be driving forward your own research. The program, I think we mentioned this briefly, it's open to both students at the high school level, at the college and postgraduate level. Of course, the level of rigor is different between those programs. If you're at the college or postgraduate level, we expect that we're going to be taking you a bit farther and be a bit more rigorous in terms of what we expect for you to be doing. But in both programs, you don't necessarily have to have experience in order to be a good candidate. I did not have experience doing research when I applied to a number of research programs at Harvard. And so we keep the same standard that you need to have academic excellence, you need to have curiosity. You don't need to necessarily have experience in that specific field in order to be eligible for the program. I think we'll...
Great, Stephan, we have a lot of questions, so we're going to leave it on the slide, and I'm going to ask some of these questions out loud to Stephan. We will be sending you guys an email with some of the points that we made in today's presentation, and you please do note down our email addresses if you want to contact us. So I'm going to dive in straight to the Q&A. Okay, so a question that is, it's very interesting. I think you touched upon it, Stephan, but I'm going to ask it again: is how do we develop our researching skills as a beginner? Can you suggest some ways or tips?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really good question. So I like to think about research as a canoeing in the ocean, and kind of an analogy I think about. So researching skills is about essentially canoeing in the ocean. I think has two parts. It's how fast can you canoe, and then where are you going? How do you know the direction to go? So the canoeing part you can develop yourself. So it depends on your field. So for example, I work as a data scientist. For me, that means I need to develop skills in Python, R. I need to understand machine learning models. I need to understand the statistics underlying my models. I need to understand a bit of the field. That's how fast I can canoe. But how do I know the direction of where I should be going? And that's really where a mentor comes in. They help you set kind of the North Star of where you should be going. And so working directly with a mentor is really important when it comes to research, because you can develop all the skills that you want, but unless you understand what are the questions that matter, it can be very hard. And so I encourage, this is why I'm very passionate about our program, why I encourage people, if there's particular faculty members or researchers that you find really exciting, to reach out to them. However it is that you get that mentorship, I think it's all great. But that helps you develop that second part of this kind of canoeing in an open ocean of knowing where should I be going? What is an important question to be answered?
I'm going to add to that, Stephan. I also think that research skills stems from extensive reading as well. I think it's important that if you want to really think about research, that you're not just kind of looking at your textbooks in school or just focusing on what is being taught. I mean, to really be curious, like how Stephan said, to be wanting to understand more about the world and ask questions. The starting point is to see what have others in the field done. Right? What are people, if you're interested in, say, data, like in, or, biochemistry, like what I studied, what is happening in genetics right now? Why am I interested in this? What research is happening? And the other thing that you can do is also read some published papers, just to give you an idea of the level that goes into this. I mean, again, high school students are not expected to, first of all, publish something like that, but even understand everything that you read in a published paper, definitely not in nature or science. But if you kind of give yourself a task of saying, okay, listen, I'm going to read a published paper first and see how other scientists have approached this particular question, that'll automatically start giving you ideas. And then, of course, that when you go hand in hand with a mentor, you'll be much better prepared to, really dig deep and answer and think about what you want to do research on. But I think reading extensively and really thinking about what interests you is definitely, something that a beginner should do. So, Stephan, there seems to be this question about, so many students that are, doing research, maybe through professors that they have identified on their own or that they're working on. They all have this notion that it must be published, and how do they get it published? Can you just speak a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say two things. So one is whether something should be published, and then two is if you decide that it should be, or you really want it to be, how you could potentially go about doing that. So the first is whether or not something needs to be published. And the reality is not really. And for most programs, particularly for those applying to, frankly, those applying to undergraduate or even PhD programs, the percentage of applicants that have published research is in the single digits. It's very small. It's not an expectation. And I would not think about research as being only useful if it goes to publication. In fact, that's a small percentage of all research. What's useful when it comes to your application is showing that you've done the research. Getting to the working paper level is really at the level that you want it to be. Say, I've done this research paper, it said I've worked with these people. That's at the level that you want, and you can already speak to it at that point. And so publication is important for professors and for, for people who are doing their PhD currently. For someone who is a undergraduate, a high school student, it's I think it's important to recognize that that's not necessarily the goal, and that's not going to put you that much ahead of someone who has done research but hasn't published it. So okay, that's one. So two, if you are really important for you to publish, there's a couple of ways to go about doing it. At Lumiere, we have connections, and we're working partners with a number of different publications, both at the high school and at the college level. We can always help guide you in that, and we're happy to. There are also other ways to publish that are not necessarily through a academic journal, but you could publish a popular press article. So one example that I did was I wrote a piece for the Harvard Business Review when I was a senior in college that looked at the effect of gender disparities on company outcomes. That is a very valuable piece. It's not in a journal, but it is an immensely powerful thing for me when I was applying to later schools, and that's something that you can consider doing as well. So the two things I think to note: one is that publication is not necessarily the goal, and I would push people to not think of it that way. And then two is that if you do want to publish, of course, there are resources out there, and I would think creatively about where it is that you want to publish, and then what type of impact that you want to have.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm just going to add to that. I think, sometimes when you work with a mentor, they can also guide you if there's an opportunity to publish, and they, typically they're the ones that understand this publication process. And oftentimes, you're doing research with them on a very niche subject, or you might have been doing research which they will implement in a bigger paper, and you could get your name mentioned there. Yep. And the second is that, like Stephen said, the end goal of doing research at high school level is not to kind of get your name out in a Nature or Science journal. I mean, frankly, if you do that, then, you should just skip your undergrad and go do a master's straight away. But the idea is to kind of develop these skills, to develop the rigor, the critical thinking skills. And it's an ammunition that you have, when you're interviewed. You can talk about it. It's something that you can implement in your college application, right? You can write an essay about it. You can talk about how you learned so much about yourself when you were doing research. A lot of the times universities ask, why are you interested in, say, chemistry, or why are you interested in the major that you've applied for? And if you've been able to say that I conducted research in this space, and I really delved deeper and understood my subject in a much more deeper level, and this is why I want to continue studying it in university, that is a much more justified answer than just saying that I read one book and I like chemistry. Right? So there's so many different aspects to research that can really help you in different ways. And it doesn't, and you don't have to publish it. You can also, provide a link to your research project in your application. If you're applying to the US or Canada, there are places on the application form where you can, there's an additional information section, or there's something called slide room that universities do look at, where you can provide access to the research. So if a university does want to look at what you've done, they can access it. And the other thing is that letters of recommendation, oftentimes universities allow you to submit letters of recommendation from other people than other people other than your school counselor or your school teachers. And you can use this professor to ask to write a letter of recommendation for you. And oftentimes, if they're a tenured professor or a well-known researcher, then this can really aid you and help you also stand out in the process. So yeah, I mean, goal is not simply to just publish yourself, but also to just gain the other skills that come hand in hand with research, and really to get you to know more about that particular subject and justify to yourself that that's actually what you want to study. Okay, so there's a question about how many hours generally do students at the undergraduate level need to invest in research?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say you have to answer that question by first asking the question, what type of research are you doing, and what is your goal with that research? So I'll give the context of the Lumiere Research Scholar Program. Our goal is to help students develop an independent research paper. And by the way, I know someone asked about how they can apply. We'll send the kind of application process afterwards. But the way that we structure is that it's a 10-week program where students spend around 5 to 8 hours per week diving into that subject. And that's enough time to develop a research paper, say at a college level for a high school student or master's level for a college student. if you are working on a single research project, let's say it's in a lab field, then the hours can be really significant. For example, you might spend, Namita talked about her example doing research. I have many of my friends from Harvard, for example, working in zebrafish labs. So they're looking at trying to understand how the mind works, understanding the brain more deeply. That for a summer could be 10 hours a day for an entire summer to get data. In other fields, it can be significantly less. So for example, in a field like that I'm in, when we have a data set that works well, it can be over the course of a few months can be a couple of hours a week that can then get us to a research paper. But so it really depends on the field, which will have different demands in terms of how you do the research, going back to those 4 types of research, and as well the goal of whether or not you want to see this project through for years, or if you want to see it for 6 months, dive into it, get an understanding of it, and then share that with different admissions committees.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like a minimum number of hours that you need to have done research to justify it as research. But yeah, I mean, the longer you spend on it, the deeper you delve into it, the more valuable that it's going to be, and that's going to come out through your write-up or a paper that you've written. So yeah. So there's an interesting question here, Stephen. I think you and I touched upon it, but we mentioned that you can do research in a creative field like dance. Yeah. So how do you go about that? I'm going to quickly, talk a little bit about this, because I had a student who, who's at Barnard now, and she's a passionate mathematician. She applied for math, but she was also a dancer, and I think she's even doing some fantastic part of a lot of dance clubs, in the Barnard, in Barnard at the moment. And as a high school student, she actually did a research project on the dynamics of dancing, and like the beauty of choreography and symmetry. Mm. It was really interesting, because what she did is she kind of used math to kind of correlate different positions of different dancers, and then kind of bring that together to see whether, if a symmetry was created, there was beauty or not. So she kind of married her interest in dance and math and came up with this great paper. Again, she had a mentor who kind of guided her, but she never got this stuff published, but she was able to kind of write about it in her application, explain why this was important to her, why she was able to kind of get 2 fields that she was really interested to combine together and do some research. And even, she talked about it in an interview. She also did apply to competitive programs in the UK. And she was able to kind of talk about different mathematical formulas that she used to kind of, show the placements of different dancers, and how, she choreographed this piece on her own, and how, what it meant mathematically to have that particular kind of a choreographic formation. So there's so many ways that you can approach it. Stephen, maybe if you can share some other ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a great example. So marrying fields in one. I'll give another example. So, a close friend of mine has done research in poetry. So poetry is another, creative field. The way that they approached their research was actually by analyzing poetry. So there's another way of approaching it, which is around the analysis of the creative field. So in his case, he was interested in 19th century poets. And so he wanted to work on a research project that analyzed these different 19th century poets, compared, contrasted them, and then wrote, again, this would be a theoretical paper, that 3rd column, on what you learn about poetry of the time by analyzing and comparing these different types of research. So that's another way to do it. There's many ways to approach it. And then one of the things I think is important, I mentioned, is when you have someone who's in that field can guide you in that process.
Thank you. Okay, Stephen, we have a question here. What kind of research do you suggest for STEM students at high school level, lab-based or theoretical? I think given the current situation, probably theoretical, just because you can't physically get into a lab right now. But yeah, I mean, can I let you answer that a bit more in terms of Lumiere research as well?
Yeah, and I would say, by the way, that it's not a dichotomy between those 2 things. There's another one, which is quantitative, which is very common. I mean, one of our research mentors now, his work is all on the human brain. He's at Yale. He's this fascinating researcher. He's also he's a former bodybuilder. He's this really cool guy. He's so big, so jacked, and so smart. And the way he does his research is by looking at open data sets of the human body, particularly scans of the brain. And so there's this third piece, which is quantitative. For sure, I think in this climate, you probably cannot do lab-based research, and you want to look towards either theoretical or quantitative. And I would say in general, those two areas are going to be able to get you results faster than lab-based research. So it's a bit of a taste preference. And think in our current environment, theoretical or quantitative is the better way. Of course, Lumiere, because we're an online program focused primarily on those two, though we are opening some lab-based programs in the years to come. Right now, not the best time to do that. But I think that I would encourage people to think outside. It's really not the type of research that's critical at this point, especially at the high school level. It's showing, hey, I've done it, I get it, and I have some experience in it. I think you. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, there we go. I think we have time for one more question. This is actually a great question. Saying for freshman students who are contemplating a gap year, can the research help with college credits if they apply back to college?
That's a great question. It depends a lot on the university in terms of how they assign credits. I would say, of course, credits are important. Another way to think about it is, will it help a student out long term? And I think for those students, the answer is absolutely yes, because it allows them to dive deep into a subject. They have time because they're taking a gap year. It allows them to show that expertise over the course, and not just for graduate school admissions, but also for jobs if they're looking to enter into the private sector. Namita, how would you answer that?
I think I would say, again, it is very university specific, and typically universities give credit for courses and for high school high school achievement, like courses that you've done in high school, whether it's an IB program or or an AP subject or something. They do not typically give credit for field work or for a research project. So I doubt that you would get credit for it, but of course you can check with the universities that you apply to. But what I can say is that if you are taking a gap year and you're engaging in research, then that'll definitely make you stand out in the application process and make you and justify why you've taken a gap year as well. Because oftentimes you will have to write a gap year essay when you're applying to, say, universities in the US, or even if you are applying to the UK or Canada and you have taken a gap year, you need to tell them what you've done in that year. And if you said that you've and if you say that you've done research, then that's definitely gonna go down well.
Great. I see a quick question on computer science. Maybe I can just quickly answer that. Computer science actually can fall into many fields as well, theoretical being one. You might ask around
just 1 second, Stephen. I'm going to read out the question so everyone knows. It's what sort of research can be conducted in the field of computer science? Okay, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, so again, I think the answer is that there's these two main categories here of research. One can be theoretical, one can be quantitative. So for example, you could be looking at new approaches to understand how databases work, how memory functions. For example, one of our research mentors is a PhD student at Yale focused on databases. That would be more in the theoretical landscape. Now, computer science, of course, can be quite applied. Many of the ways it can be applied into, for example, is in machine learning. And you can use the field of computer science to then apply it to another field. And these intersections, I think, are particularly interesting when you're thinking about applying, because it shows, similar to the dance example, which I think is a great one, you have multiple interests and you're able to combine them into one.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's time's up for us. Thank you so much, Stephan, for co-presenting with me today. It's been great. I think you shared some really valuable information and great personal experiences to encourage students to actually think about research, and Lumiere is a great platform for students to really get a mentor and delve into this process. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, and I hope everyone out there, gets the opportunity to do research, to dive into it, and I really encourage it, whether it's with Lumiere or whether it's independently. I mean, it's for me, it's been life-changing, and I think it can be for you as well.
Thank you. We will be following up for everyone that's registered for this webinar, and you've shared your email address. We will be following up with a summary that can give you access to the application form for Stephan's for the Lumiere research cohort for August. And the Red Pen will also share their information if you have any further questions about the educational space and applying to university. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.